Okay, so hello everybody. This is number 2 in a 3-part series which is designed for Amity faculty. And the first one was about expectations. And you'll see a circle and triangle diagram that we used on the first videotape, which shows environment, hospitality, and teaching as really 3 critical areas where every faculty should be competent, and where our expectations is that you will be competent. And then with those kind of impinging factors of empathy, enthusiasm, and of course, last but not least, contract compliance. So today, the third one is going to be about knowledge and skills, okay, to give you a sneak preview. This one, however, we're really talking about knowing your people. And you know, in the first video we talked a lot. In order to do a good job in helping people transform their lives, you've got to know who they are. And it's more than a casual, just knowing their name. You've got to know quite a bit about them in order to really be effective. And this, obviously, whether you're working in a therapeutic community or some kind of a counseling program or whatever, it's an absolute must, bottom line. Well, what do we mean by that? And I want to talk today about things that we expect you to know so that you can say, oh, okay, well, I can do that. And then a great tool for learning more about people than you would by just sitting down and kind of running through a series of questions. So let's talk about those things. As you all know, we have put up quite a few videotapes that are streaming on, and you go to YouTube, Amity Foundation USA. I'd like you to make sure you look at the first video again, the expectations video. I'd like you to really look at the 3-part series that I did on improving encounter groups, because you'll learn something about the whole history of encounter groups, and you'll see some examples of both good work and also work that you want to avoid. I think everybody should read this curriculum, Circles for Beginners, and become familiar with it, because Naya did a great job of really one step after the other of how to introduce people to circles, okay? And then I want to also suggest there's 2 videos now that Robin Retmer has made on ceremony. These are all really good basic stuff for improving your skills as a person at Amity, a counselor, a demonstrator, a faculty member, whatever term we are using, to really be competent in working with our students. So know your people. So what are the basics? Okay, this is kind of the 101 of knowing your people. Let's suggest that you're probably working with a group of people you've been assigned or picked, or however that came about, with a group of people. Could be 8, could be a dozen, could be 15 or so. It kind of depends on what campus you're at, and then other factors intervene from time to time, so the numbers kind of go up and down. But for every student you work with, this would be our expectation, that of course you would know the name of that person, you know, and any aliases or nicknames that they might have. Then kind of the geography. Okay, where did they grow up? Did they grow up in an urban area? Did they grow up in a rural area? Did they grow up in a neighborhood, or did they grow up in the hood? Okay, so, and is going to tell you a lot about that person. You know, that's just the geography. And of course, some people, of course, grew up in one place. They might have grown up in a rural area and ended up in a city, or vice versa, or something like that. Think about 3 major events in the life of each student. If I asked you today, any of you watching this, okay, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I want you to come up with 3 major, kind of seminal, pivotal moments in your life. You would probably, in probably less than 5 minutes, you know, have, okay, there was this, you know, my dad died when I was 5 years old, or, I ended up moving from a place where everybody knew me when I was 10, and I moved to a whole different neighborhood and I had to start all over again, and nobody liked me there and I didn't get along, and, you know, I mean, or I was involved in a gang, and my friend was killed, and I ended up holding him while he bled out in my arms. Whatever. You know, I mean, these events can be either enormously traumatic and dramatic, or maybe some of them are much more subtle. But and so you think of these things, you know, in your life. Well, you should know from talking to your students, what are those events? Because they think they shape their life, okay? As you get to know them better, and as they're at Amity longer, they may, if you ask them again, you know, 2 or 3 months later, they may have revised that list because they're involved in circles, and they're interacting with other people, and so forth and so on. But it's important to get that information, because it gives you kind of a sense, what does this person think happened to them? What are the things that really happened to them, or what are the things that they did that were really important in their lives? What are their talents or skills? Sometimes we make an assumption. Somebody's been involved in, they were involved in gangs, and they went to prison, and they were in prison for a long time, and they came out, and we think, well, they really don't have any skills. They've never even really had a job. Wrong. Okay. Everybody has something that they do well. Very frequently, it's not recognized, okay, because of the environments that they've been in. But it's important. And what are their aspirations? What are the things that they really want to do? And it may seem silly or fantasy-like for somebody to tell you they've done 10 years in prison, or they haven't even completed high school, and they say, oh, I really want to be an attorney. Listen to the aspirations, because that dream, however unrealistic you think it is something that's very important to them. There may be some reality testing that takes place, but there's a kernel of that person in that particular aspiration. And that's important to know, you know. And the skills, I mean, it's, you know, so we get people who are often aren't even aware of the skills that they have. Particularly, people become very good at reading other people, because it's a survival skill, and that is very useful in community. Okay, poke around in your conversations with people. Let people talk. You know, a lot of this process is not you talking. It's your student talking, okay, and you learning about them. So, of course, who are they living with at Amity? We've had situations where demonstrators, you say, okay, who's Sally living with? They don't even know the room she's in. They don't know who she's living with. Well, that's pretty darned important, you know. And how is that working out? Okay, because sometimes people are living with people that it's really good for their process of change, and there's other situations which it's not so good, and you need to be aware of that and to take action when necessary. The other thing that sounds extraordinarily simple, but it isn't. It's really interesting. We're doing some of these surveys, and we've asked people, what do you need? So many people need glasses to read, you know, because some of these folks coming out of prison, particularly in our California campuses, they've been in prison for a long time. They're actually older, and I know when I turned about 40, 45 or something like that, glasses, okay, and it's just something. It's a natural physiological process that these muscles in your eyes are not working quite so well in terms of near focus, far focus anymore, and you start having a really difficult time reading. And if you can't read, that becomes a real difficulty for you. So it's important, you know, what do you need? And so much of what we do is that question. What do you need? And we can't always fulfill every need they have. I need to, you know, travel several thousand miles to visit my dying uncle. We may not be able to accommodate that, but it's important at least to hear it, you know, and that may set some other things in motion. Well, you can't get there right now, maybe because it's just impossible because you're on parole or probation or other factors make that impossible. How can we honor your uncle here? What's a ceremony we can do? But if you never ask what's going on, what do you need, you're never able to come up with an appropriate response for that. But you know, things, glasses, clothes, medical issues, family issues, relationship issues, anxieties. So many people we run into worry about when I leave Amity, because you know you're going to get you're definitely going to be fed well. You're going to have a bed to sleep in. You're going to have people who care about you around you. But there's a lot of anxiety. What happens when I leave? Okay, there's kind of two factors. One is people think they're bulletproof and everything's just going to work out right, which is unrealistic. You know, they're not thinking about the bumps in the road and the problems that are almost inevitable. But there's enormous amount of anxiety about what's going to happen and how am I going to make this transition back and who am I going to live with and who is going to support me and am I going to be able to get a job and, you know, how's my family, those relationships going to work out. And as we listen to these issues, then we can do all sorts of creative things. We can put people together in circles or in ceremonies to deal with these issues where they're really helping each other. There's a great phrase from some famous person whose name escapes me at the moment. It says, when the best leader's work is done, the people say, we did it ourselves. So a lot of what we do by hearing and really knowing our people, we lead them to each other to problem solve. We don't have to solve all the problems, okay? And we don't want to solve all the problems, but we want the problem solved, okay? And this overused word empowerment is appropriate in this situation because as we use all of these wonderful tools that we have, which we'll describe more in the next video, we essentially help people become problem solvers for each other, okay? And I remember many years ago, I was having, I had to change a law here in Arizona, and I had to get some people who were very credible to speak about the value of people who had addiction problems, criminal justice problems, who had grown up in the hood and so forth and so on, and how valuable they were as demonstrators, faculty, counselors. And so I ended up having my first conversation with Harry Wexler, very notable criminal justice researcher, did a lot of work on therapeutic communities, and did the outcome research for the R.J. Donovan Project, and turned out to be a great friend for 30 years. So I said to Harry, he was talking about therapeutic communities, and I said, Harry, what is it about therapeutic communities that's drawn you, as an academic, into this world, of people and the value of the therapeutic community? And he said, it's about dignity. He said, therapeutic communities give people dignity. And it's a thing that no other treatment modality does. They're treated like patients. They're treated as kind of the throwaway people that we have to provide some kind of services for, but they're really kind of not important people in our society. And so, the offices they come into are ugly. The people who meet them are often very bureaucratic, who don't engage with them, except, what's your name, what's your number. And he said therapeutic communities inherently give people dignity. And one of the ways they give people dignity is they say, you can help solve this problem. Bill's got a problem. You've had some experience with this. Let's you and Bill get together and do some talking about that, and you can help him with that issue, whether it's in a circle or whether it's a kind of a one-on-one or whatever, using the tools that we have, and we have this wide array of tools in the teaching and therapeutic community. So let's go over these one more time quickly, just so you kind of get it. One, the name of that person, any aliases, nicknames, things like that. I was called RG because my dad's brother was living in the South at a time when everybody got a nickname that was kind of their initials, and my initials were Rodney Gordon, so I ended up with RG. Okay, but geography. Where did people grow up? What part of the country did they grow up? And what kind of neighborhood did they grow up in? And how did that affect them? How did they function and thrive or didn't thrive in that situation? What are 3 major events in their lives that they think are pivotal points? What are their talents and skills? Okay? What are their aspirations? What is kind of their vision for themselves? And many people don't have a vision for themselves. They've been beaten down and told you're worthless, you're never going to amount to anything, often from the time that almost in early childhood, you're just like your dad, and your dad was a louse, so you're going to be a worthless, So in many cases, the asking of the question, what are your aspirations, you may get an answer like, well, I really don't have any. But you've planted the seed, well, that's something we want to work on, okay? That's something you want to work on in your group. That's something you want to work on, because you got to have a vision as to where you're going. And maybe you don't have it now, but let's make sure that you find it during this process, because that energy of having an aspiration is going to give you, the energy to move forward in your life and to cope with some of the things that are going to happen. Who are they living and where are they living at Amity, and how's that working out? What are their needs? And these are both physical needs and social needs. Okay. Why do I suggest you watch this thing, this video on encounter groups? Because I spent quite a bit of time on this because you know, in the over 50 years I've been involved with therapeutic communities, the thing that I learned really, really early on was the power of the circle, of the encounter group, to help people in a safe setting, to help people really be honest, to talk about things that they feel very uncomfortable about, and often the deep, dark secrets that they were going to go to the grave with, or just other things, and interacting with people in an honest, spontaneous, authentic way. The magic that happens in terms of people beginning the process of transformation. And I have said many times that a therapeutic community without circles is like a riding academy without horses. I mean, you've left out the most important ingredient. So, but many, there seems to be in our country a drift away from having really good circles. Many times they're very superficial. And you know, check-in groups, how are you feeling today? Fine, good, next, this isn't going to help anybody. I mean, but as you look at this three-part series on kind of, first you get kind of a bit of the history of it, and then you really see some of the incredible transformative processes that can occur in good encounter groups. Unfortunately, social workers, counselors can get certified and never have to do any work in groups, which is a tragedy because they're missing this critical component of a transformational process. And remember, we're not in the business of just removing symptoms, okay, and making people feel a little better. We're really in the process of helping people transform their lives, a change of identity. And you really see it. You see people who were, I think of one of my favorite students, who was later a faculty member for a few years, very powerful, who came in, Navajo girl, wearing baggies, I mean, ready to knock you out if you got in her way, and then transformed into this beautiful, very beautiful, I mean, really got back into her culture, and she was so proud of learning some of the language so she could talk Navajo. She could talk to her grandmother for the first time, dressing in a modern but certainly culturally appropriate way that she felt really good about, really reaching out and helping her family. That isn't symptom removal. That's transformation. And that's really what we hope for. We don't always get that, of course, but that's really the aim. And I said on an earlier video, we only hit what we aim for, so we might as well aim really high, okay? So good circles are the ideal setting for a lot of this getting to know your students, okay? And it's also fine for them to get to know you. It's also for them to get to know each other. And there's also many appropriate ways for them to getting to know you. And we'll talk about that in a minute because there's an obvious way of talking about that. It's very appropriate. I know when we work in correctional settings, there's all this. There are a lot of places that say, well, you can't ever talk about who you are and talk about your story. So we're already setting up a we-they dichotomy. We're setting up, we want you to be authentic, but we're not going to be authentic. And of course, there's some boundary issues there. But it's so important that we meet people as human beings and not with some kind of a bureaucratic uniform on, psychological uniform on, where people just feel like this is I'm dealing with a robot, I'm not really dealing with a person. The other thing that's really important is that students really reveal themselves. You get to know them in a lot of ways in the activities that you do. On work activities, somebody's working in the kitchen. You go in and work for an afternoon in the kitchen, you'll get to know that student much better than you would in a one-on-one counseling session in a lot of ways. A lot of times when I was, people wanted to talk to me, I'd say, walk with me. I've got to do a property tour right now. Just walk with me and we'll talk. And I would be talking about, I would be listening to them, but I'd also be talking about some of the things that I was looking at or needed to correct. It was a great way for that person to feel like I really cared about them and I had the time to do it. And at the same time, they were learning kind of what I did, and which was very interesting for them. Gatherings, of course. As we set up our morning and evening gatherings, if they're really done thoughtfully, and they always should be, you have an opportunity to ask people to do things in those gatherings or put them in situations, a skit or to read an announcement or to do something else to affirm someone else, and you get to know them better that way. What are the things that they're comfortable doing? What are uncomfortable things for them to do? Different kinds of games are great. We used to do, I would do dichotomy games. I love dichotomy games, and people would reveal themselves in ways in a dichotomy game that they would never tell you, Everybody who has a mother who loved them go to this side of the room. The person who doesn't go to that side of the room has just said something really important to you without uttering a word, which you then make a mental or maybe even a paper note. Okay, got to follow up on that one, okay? And they're fun, first of all. I mean, they can be funny and amusing and so forth and so on, but also very revealing. And there's many ways to get to know your students, not just the traditional, okay, come in my office, which is probably the worst way to get to know people. That's how probation officers do it. We don't want to do that. Take people for a hike, do some other thing that's really enjoyable and entertaining for people, and watch and listen, and you will learn a lot, okay? So it's not all, sitting down and, writing things down. So we're going to talk now about, I think, a really important tool. This is called the Social Atom. It's developed by Jake Moreno, a psychologist who developed psychodrama back in the 1930s. But he essentially developed this process. The social atom, very simply, is just a diagram that represents people around you with whom you have had an emotional relationship, okay? So it's kind of this nucleus of relationships around you. And there's a number of ways of doing it. The simplest and probably the way it's done the most often is simply pencil and paper. You piece of paper, pencil. You give people kind of the symbols that help them in terms of this, and you say, okay, just write it down, and you give them sort of an age group. Okay, write down your social atom when you were 5 years old. Okay, write down your social atom today. So. The social atom, of course, changes over time. It can be done in a group using a whiteboard. So this is a prison in Japan which uses the Amity curriculum, and which Nye and I actually trained the counselors there. And here they are using the social atom, and it's working beautifully. So it can be done in a group. So as somebody's up doing their social atom, everybody's kind of observing, and then there's some feedback or there's some questions. Well, how old was your dad? And or what was going on with your mom? She seems really, really distant from you on the diagram. So there's interaction, which is great, which may lead to a great circle later on, or it may. Of course, other people watching it are also being affected. They're thinking about their own social atom and some of the situations in their lives that they may have not really thought about in that way. So there's a lot of things going on in doing it in a circle. Or the other thing you can do is you can act it out. Okay, okay, and so we're doing my social atom. Okay, Taze, you're going to be my dad. I want you over in that corner because he was really absent from my life. Okay, Rose, you're going to stand close to me. You're going to be my mom, and you do it in that kind of dynamic way, which is also kind of fascinating because as you're placing people in your social atom, all kinds of emotions start coming up. And also all kinds of questions come up, like, well, why was my cousin such an important person in my life, and where, and I haven't talked to him for years, you know what I mean? So there's all kinds of interesting things that really happen. But in terms of knowing your people, bueno. I mean, this is really, really good stuff. And this is going beyond the knowing your name, where do they live, what are their needs. We're starting to get into the deeper psychological dynamics of a person, which is very, very valuable for them and for you to really understand. So here's some symbols, and you'll see these on the screen. A red box, a blue triangle, and a yellow circle. The red box is kind of non-gender objects, situations. It could be a dog, it could be a location, it could be, something like that. The blue triangle is males. The yellow circle are females. And then, of course, we have over on the right, you have the same symbols, but now they have a little checkered line or dotted line around them. So these are things where they're no longer in your life. It's a deceased pet or an object that was important to you that you lost or is not in your life anymore. A deceased male, a deceased female. So it could be, my mom died last year, and boom, And then we have lines. A straight line is mutual attraction. So I would have, maybe my mother with that kind of a line. One of the dotted lines, little tiny dots, is mutual dislike or rejection. And then we have longer dots, longer lines rather, broken but longer, and that's indifference. So these are people who were kind of in your life, but they were pretty indifferent to you. So, okay, in this diagram, I just did one, and so you have the big triangle, because it's a big triangle because it is the person that we're talking about, and it says me, 7 years old. Okay, so now we know kind of this is the time period that we're talking about. We see another big yellow circle, says mother, and then in parentheses says schizophrenic. Now, interestingly, as you look at the lines, you get a straight line, which is mutual attraction, and then you get this indifferent line. That's schizophrenia, which is I love you, but I'm also indifferent to you. So you're getting these double messages all the time. You're important, you're not important, and so that's an interesting way of diagramming that. Okay, then you see over on the left a grandfather who's pretty big. His triangle's pretty big, so he's pretty important, but he's a long ways away. But he's got a nice line, a mutual, love line there, but he's quite a ways away. So this diagram is telling you about the importance of the relationship, but also how close is that relationship. So this person at this particular time was living in a situation where the grandfather was distant, but still very important. Then you look over and you see the grandmother, much smaller circle, and kind of a indifference line. Okay, so, and then you get the father a long ways away, because in this person's life, the father and the mother split up when the person was a year old. So the dad is, something that the child knows there is one, but they not really having any contact. So that person on the way. Then we have a 2-year-old half-brother who's close. You can see that it's a smaller triangle, but he's close. Okay. Then you have a friend, bigger triangle, with a great, and the line is really thick now, which indicates a strong attraction, right? Okay. Then we have a red box, which is kind of a location box, saying living 14 miles out of town in Alaska, very isolated. So that tells you a little bit about the setting. Then up in the right-hand corner, we have the current stepfather, and we have the really dotted line, which is antipathy. This person doesn't like the stepfather. The stepfather doesn't like the kid, okay? And then we have another line which has really big dots, antipathy, dislike dots, and that's to another stepfather who's no longer in the picture, but this was a stepfather that the person had who, if you explored this, that stepfather was a violent alcoholic who beat the mother and was very abusive to the child, okay? Okay, now, do you get it? Look at the amount of information on this thing. Now, of course, there's all kinds of questions to ask about this, like, well, how did you feel about this? And, let's talk about this a little bit more. Or let's act it out now. Or does anybody in the room really identify with this situation? Anybody else have something kind of like this? You see what I mean? It's a treasure. It's so rich in terms of the dynamics. How did this affect the person growing up? Maybe it's a situation where that person had really difficult trust issues with women because mom is so strange in this relationship. They come closer, I hate you, or the abusive, the dad who's gone, followed by an abusive stepfather, followed by a current stepfather who doesn't like you, who has no interest, he's indifferent, okay? Well, how does that play out in one's adult life, okay? So what I'm trying to give you is that you do this with your students, and all of a sudden, you got a really interesting picture of somebody's life. And then you say, okay, well, let's try it now at 10 or 12 or 16 or whatever. I mean, and you start getting different pictures, but you really get a fascinating and in-depth look at that person's life from their perspective. And guess what? They also get a look at their life that they've really never done before, And all the people, if you're doing it, if you can do this, of course, one-on-one, but some of the richness of it is having a group of people doing it together and then talking about it, because then you're multiplying the learning, okay? And the thing I want to tell you as demonstrators, how do you start this? Start with yourself. Do your own 2 or 3 times and kind of get familiar with it. talk to your wife or talk to your best friend and say, hey, look, I just did this. Let me talk it through with you and see what you think. You know, don't just spring it on your students without ever having done it yourself. And you'll get a much better sense of it if you know, and it doesn't, I've done this, of course, many, many times with lots of different people. But, you know, it's really, really valuable. Start with yourself, you know, and see what you think. I think you'll see how valuable it is. So it's a good way for students to get to know themselves. It's a great way for them to get to know each other. And again, remember, we're leading them to each other. We're empowering them. We're dignifying them by saying, yeah, you not only, at Amity, not only are you going to be able to change your own life, you can play a very important role in changing other people's lives. Okay, so start with yourself. As you do this, you can pick different times in people's lives, so you really see how the relationship change over time. You may find some patterns in people's lives, you know, like I suggested. Obviously, me having a schizophrenic mother made me wary of women. You know, I mean, it took some work for me to kind of get over that. Here's the most important person in my life for at least the first 10 years of my life, and I could never figure this relationship out. It was never clear to me exactly where I stood or where she stood. And in the meantime, she had 5 husbands by the time I was 10 years old. So I mean, it was, plus her schizophrenia, so it was a fairly chaotic experience, you know. So there were some things for me to kind of work out as I matured and grew up. So early childhood is often, you know, this is the Alice Miller thing, you know, often a very, very important time in a person's life, which sometimes really establishes patterns or directions that are persistent. And, you know, the typical thing when we start to get into this stuff is people say, well, the past is the past. What does this have to do with recovery? You know, what happened to me when I was 2 years old or 5 years old? Man, it is important, okay? And when you start doing this work, people begin to understand how important it is and how, you know, when is your future your past when you haven't examined your past? And your past is determining your future and you're not even aware of it, you know. Back to Plato, the unexamined life is not worth living. Okay, here we go, another diagram. It's a little simpler, and this one isn't me, okay? So this is a female, 4 years old, and you see on the right, the first thing you see is you see Dad, and a really strong antipathy, dislike line, okay, from Dad to the little girl. Then you see Mom, who's a pretty good sized circle, but very much like the one you saw previously, you see 2 lines. You see an indifference line, and you see a mutual caring line. So this relationship is conflicted. Then you see there's a very strong attraction line to a friend, okay? And then you see an equally really strong line to a cat, okay? All right? So here we have, when we start asking about this, what do we find out? We find out the father has been molesting the little girl. Remember, she's 4 years old. The father's been molesting the little girl, and the ambivalence with the mom is mom knows about it and is not doing anything about it, okay? We've seen this situation many times where the mother is desperate for the relationship for emotional reasons, for financial reasons, or whatever, and the child is being sacrificed one way or the other. I mean, obviously molestation or sexual abuse is probably the most horrendous way that happens, but it happens in other circumstances too. So the friend is really important and the cat is really important. You know, these are the two relationships that the little girl can count on. The other ones are fraught with difficulty. And what you see in this, if for those of you who are familiar with Alice Miller, she really talks about the informed witness. That one of the things that's really important in a person's life in one of these kind of awful situations is a safe person, maybe it's a grandmother or an aunt or an uncle or something like that, who can at least tell this child, you're okay, you're a good person, you're not responsible for this, and maybe somebody that the child can talk to honestly. Obviously, in this situation, she didn't feel safe talking to the mom because the mom she's kind of aware that mom is aware and not doing anything, and she's also aware that dad is kind of a psychopath. And in addition, he's doing all kinds of other things. He's terrorizing her in various other ways, you know, physically terrorizing her, and so not safe to talk about this situation. And so anyhow, this is a real person, this is a real situation, and this is a great insight into how this now adult person, now adult woman, is looking at her childhood. Okay? Okay, here's another diagram. This is a male, 20 years old, and this is this one has, we'll start on the left-hand side of the diagram, and you see 3, it's probably more, but for this diagram 3 was enough, gang members involved in a gang. And they have a affection line. It's not, you know, huge, but there's a line of mutual respect and care. And we know a lot of people who have had, have not found, don't belong in their family, or maybe they don't even have a family, you know. And they have this tremendous need for belonging. We all do. And so they find a gang, and they belong to that gang, and they begin to get some of those affection needs, and I'm part of this, I belong, people count on me, I can count on them, all the stuff that we actually look for in our own families, you know. But of course it gets perverted by the illegal activities and about, you know, all those things. I mean, I remember an old-timer talking to some new person at one point. It was profound, it was years ago, but it always stuck in my mind. He said, I thought they were my friends. You know, we had this mutual respect, we really worked together, we could really count on each other. I overdosed and they left me on the roof to die because none of them wanted to, you know, be there when the paramedics showed up, because they would, you know, and he said, that's what I learned about friendship. And he said, and here, this is where, in community, is where I learned about what real friendship really is. You would never abandon somebody, a friend like that. Of course, you'd never use drugs with them either. But okay, so anyhow, then you see a dad, and there's an antipathy line there. This is not a good relationship. You see a mom that's pretty distant, but there's an affection line. You have a sister who has quite a long ways and has an indifference line. Then you have a girlfriend and another friend and a male friend with strong affection lines. And then way off in the corner, you have a large triangle. It's the probation officer. Very strong antipathy, dislike line, okay? So here we have a young man who's involved in drugs, and he's using, in a gang, he's on probation. So his closest relationships are a male friend and a girlfriend who are both using drugs, okay? The other relationships that are fairly close to him are the gang members, the gang he belongs to. And we have a sister who's indifferent. We have a mom who's distant but still cares about him. So, you know, I mean, she hasn't given up. We have a dad who's probably angry, just angry about the whole situation, and has really rejected him at this particular point. So again, the worst relationship is with a probation officer, and that makes a lot of sense, okay? If you're on probation, you're in a gang, and you're using drugs, you're a probation officer, and you are not going to be copacetic. But again, as you write this out, there's a lot of learning here, you know. And you can say, you know, how did you feel about your dad just hating you and rejecting you? And probably not telling mom, no, you can't get involved with him, you know. You still love him, you're soft on him, but you know, we got to do tough love or whatever, you know. How do you feel? How did this thing with the gang members work out? Is that a relationship that really was valuable to you, or did it turn out to be something different than you thought it would be? How about the friends, you know, the girlfriend and the other friend? How did that work out, you know? And how important were these relationships to you at this time in your life? So again, and if there's an earlier version of this social Adam, is there a connection? Okay, is the reason the gang was so important is because there was really no affection in the home, or maybe dad just rejected you from day one. Okay, you know. Maybe you were adopted, okay, and so dad never felt like you were his kid. That's one possible thing. A lot of adopted kids really struggle with this. I was never really wanted. I was just sort of, because they couldn't get pregnant, and I ended up, and then my sister was born, and all the love went to her. Or there's all kinds of variations on this thing, but is there an earlier version of this where we can really begin kind of connecting the dots? Okay, and then maybe there's a later version of it. Okay, where are you now today? You know, and what are those relationships like now? And is dad still mad at you? Or are you still trying to win his love, and you still trying to get his appreciation? Or did he die, okay, and you're never going to be able to resolve it, you know? Or you feel like you'll never be able to resolve it. I mean, you have, through this diagram, you have entered into someone's life in a very profound way, because you are going to ask questions. Other people, if you're doing this in a group, are going to ask questions. Other people are going to say, geez, this is so much like my life, you know. And then you get those kinds of connections, and you really get people also saying, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense, because somebody has described something and it doesn't kind of ring true to other people in the group, and that's great too, you know. When they did this on Corey's film in Japan, you really see that, you know. Well, you said this, but that doesn't really make any sense, okay? So anyhow, those are 3 examples just to get you started, okay? And I think at this point, you can really get it, how knowing your people is, it sounds very simple, but it's really pretty complex. Because a lot of people think, well, yeah, I know Dick, or I know Bill, or I know Sally, or Rose, or whoever. But what does that mean? What do they know? In most cases, it's pretty superficial. Really, we really want to really know our folks. And we want them to know each other. because we know that first, that being known is so important to each one of us. When we talk about relationships, we know that in modern American society, and probably all post-industrial societies, the amount of supportive relationships, intimate relationships that we have is diminishing very, very rapidly. That there are many people in our country who are not only, we talk a lot about financial poverty, but who are in poverty because they really have no relationships. They have no people that they trust, that they're intimate with, that they can talk honestly and authentically with. And we see that over the last 100 years, but even the last 20 years, this is diminishing, and so this is, Bowling Alone. This is, David Reisman's book many years in the 50s, The Lonely Crowd. So this, we not only don't know ourselves very well, but we don't have anybody to talk to interact with. And so it's so important that we are those people, that we are showing people that we really care about them, that we are empathetic and concerned, and that they can learn how to form these kinds of relationships. If they can learn how to form these kind of intimate relationships at Amity, then they've got a toolkit to take with them in the rest of their lives. And they also kind of know, once you've done this and you have experienced real emotional intimacy with, then the fake stuff doesn't work quite as well anymore. You want the real thing in your relationships, which is a good thing, because so many of our folks, when they leave us, one of the biggest stumbling blocks for them is relationships. How to form relationships, and how to form relationships that are not just superficial or not just physical, So as you do this, start with yourself. Get familiar with this diagram. Do the diagram for a couple of people in your life. Say, hey, come on, sit down. Let's do your diagram. So practice it a little bit before you you start this with your students. And keep notes. Keep notes. Unless you have a very unusual memory, trying to keep track of what you know about 10 or 15 people is a real challenge. Some people are just, they're born that way, or I guess, or they really work at it a lot and have a kind of a natural knack for it. For most of us, we got to keep notes. So it's even good, if the person does it on paper, if they want to keep their diagram, great. But you mind if I copy that? I just want to, keep it. I've got a notebook with everybody's, not your clinical file, but your file about your folks. And maybe you've got just a 3-ring binder and with dividers, and you throw that in there, so you can and you look back at it and say, oh yeah, I forgot about that, And so the next time you're doing a circle or something like that, you think, well, let's bring up that topic. Let's go back to that. Seemed like there was something there. Let's get into that a little bit. So it makes you a much better counselor, demonstrator, faculty member, because you're thinking about not just, by the way, you haven't done your laundry, which is fair game. These day-to-day habits are certainly things that we are also trying to help people achieve some stability and regularity and discipline in their lives. That's very important. But we got to get into the stuff that's really important, because people can do their laundry and keep their rooms clean and arrive on time and still never transform their lives and change their identity. They're just being compliant, okay? And compliant is not transformation, it's just compliance, you know, and that's where a lot of places shoot for. Obviously corrections, that's what they want. They want compliance. They have absolutely no interest in change. They just want you to comply with the rules in the institution and comply with the rules when you're in the streets. But what we're really interested in is a transformational process where your identity really changes and you begin to view yourself as a different person and being on a different pathway. For that to happen, we've got to do this kind of work with people. And that's why you're here. That's why you're here. And maybe that was not explained to you when you started working here, but it's important that we explain it now, what our expectations are. I've said before, and bears repeating, I want everybody who comes into Amity to be welcomed, to have the feeling, genuine feeling, that we're glad they're here and that we're going to make every effort we can to help them transform their lives and have a good life, a life that has some dignity and some meaning as a result of their experience with Amity. Okay, so I'll see you on the next video, the third one, which will be about kind of knowledge and skills.